أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today I want to talk about a very interesting and perhaps sensitive topic, which is veganism and meat consumption. Starting with the Kitab Allah says in Surah Yasin, chapter 36, verse 71, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أولم يروا أنا خلقنا مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها ملكون. Sadaqallahul Azim. First, veganism is often presented today in modern discourse as the morally superior approach to life. Broadly speaking, the vegan argument can be summarized in the following way. The vegans say, number one, killing of animals produces suffering. When you slaughter an animal, it causes a ton of pain. Second point is, reducing suffering, overall suffering, is a morally superior way to live life. Therefore, we should not kill animals for food. This is the general context of the vegan argument. And what I often find is that when faced with the vegan argument, Muslims become either very defensive or come up with really, in my opinion, bizarre responses like, did you know that even plants feel pain? I think such arguments are fallacies because they're Tukok arguments, but they also miss the mark completely because these arguments are based on some sort of logical, analytical approach without basing it, I think, on the Quran and the Sunnah. So inshallah, in this video, I wanted to offer some thoughts on how should Muslims think about meat consumption and respond to questions from vegans about how Muslims and Islam looks at meat consumption. So the first thing is, when we look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear in Surah Al-Mulk, for example, we read, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ, right? Allah is Al-Muhi and Al-Mumit. He's the one who creates life and death, right? Now, it might be logical for us to ask, why did God create death, given that death leads to pain and suffering? But at the same time, we recognize that the gift of life is what allows us to experience all these wonderful things. So ask yourself, is it better to be born, enjoy all these provisions and die, or not be born at all, right? So the Muslim view is that death is an inevitable part of life and that we shouldn't overemphasize death and forget about the fact that this is the natural order. The second thing which we recognize, and this is the verse that I recited at the beginning of this video, is that we are his Khalifa, and humans have been uniquely given the ability, the knowledge to do farming and agriculture, right? Farming and agriculture, if you think about it, gives humans an almost divine, godlike ability to become masters of cattle, to be able to rear them, to give them life, to give them provision, to feed them, to take care of them, and to slaughter them for food. This is the verse that I recited from Surah Yasin. أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا أَنَّا خَلَقْنَا لَهُمْ مِمَّا عَمِلَتْ أَيْدِينَا أَنْعَامٍ فَهُمْ لَهَا مَلِكُونَ. Right? So metaphysically, if you think about it, humans are exemplifying godlike qualities, that we are the Khalifa of the earth. And one of the proofs is that we have lordship, we have control over, masterhood over all these other animals, right? And in fact, if you visit a farm, and you spend time with farmers and how they treat cattle, well, you can see this intimate relationship, but also this master-slave relationship. And we find that many of the biblical prophets were in fact shepherds. And farming, therefore, there's something magical about farming, which gives us the ability to care for animals, care for their flock, which probably is why prophets, many of them, were also shepherds. Wallahu alam. The third thing that the Quran teaches us is that all life forms, whether it is humans or jinn or even plants and animals, they were all created for a specific role, which was the worship of Allah, right? This is repeated in many, many places in the Quran. Allah says, "Alam tara anna Allah yusabbihu lahu ma fis samawati wal ard," right? Everything on the earth, yusabbihu lahu ma fis samawati wal ard, right? Sabbaha lillahi ma fis samawati wal ard, and so on and so forth. So birds, insects, cattle, they're all playing a very central role in the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the key point here is that it is only with this gift of life that this ultimate role of the worship can be enabled, right? And so to summarize the Qur'anic view, Allah has given humans milkiya or lordship over cattle. He has made us the Khalifa on earth, which is something that we covered in a previous video. And therefore, by giving them provisions, by treating them well, humans are performing a very central role in the worship of God and in the hierarchical order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for earth. So with this Qur'anic perspective, I think we can now attempt to initiate a response to veganism. And before we debate vegans, I think we should first align on some things that we can agree on. And the first thing that we can agree on with vegans is that, generally speaking, meat consumption should be moderated, right? This is the prophetic sunnah. If you look at the seerah of Rasulullah and if you look at this ahadith, you find that, generally speaking, the Prophet forbade people from overeating. Quran actually in Surah Al-Araf says, don't overindulge in terms of food and drink. Allah doesn't like people who do these things. So, excessive consumption of meat is not a good thing. It's not a prophetic sunnah. Rasulullah ate meat. He definitely ate meat, but he did not eat meat every day, because meat was expensive, and we can talk more about why it's expensive. People like Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he says in a hadith, إِيَّاكُمْ وَاللَّهْمْ فَإِنَّ لَهُ ذَرَاوَةً كَتِرَاوَةٍ الْخَمَرِ, right? Umar says, beware of meat because it has the same sort of addictive, ferocity. Dharawatan is almost like this sattvic Ayurvedic concept of tamas, right? Certain foods have tamas concepts or tamas substances. And so Umar is saying don't consume too much meat because it can make you addictive. And we all know that, if you overconsume meat, you get to a point where you don't feel satiated without meat on your plate, and that is a dangerous position as well. And the second thing that we agree on with the vegans is inhumane farming practices should end, right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in many hadiths exemplified how cattle should be treated, right? We have a hadith in which a very corrupt prostitute ends up going to heaven simply because she performed one act where she gave water to a thirsty cat, right? So the industrial farming environment that we all live in, where cattle and animals are treated like, packing peanuts, where they're packed together in these cages and they're slaughtered and they are treated poorly. This should end. And these practices are satanic. And in my opinion, wallahu alam, just putting a halal label on a piece of meat isn't enough. If the whole treatment throughout the life of the animal has been haram, if you've ill-treated the animal, if you've beaten it up, simply saying Bismillah while at the point of death, in my opinion, doesn't make it halal. It may make it zabiha meat, but I'm not sure that it's halal. Wallahu alam. So we agree on two things with the vegans. One is meat consumption generally should be reduced. And then the second thing is that animals should be treated humanely, and industrial farming is terrible. Now, a subtle point about meat consumption, how do you reduce it? One of the reasons why meat consumption is on the rise throughout the world is because the price of meat has come down. And the reason why the price of meat has come down generally is because of industrial farming. Industrial farming, tries to make all these farms ultra efficient by reducing costs. And one of the ways they reduce costs is by reducing space, reducing the feed, giving the animals all kinds of, growth hormones and things like that ultimately allows the farms to produce a lot more. If you really take care of the animal, if you allow it to graze freely, if you provide cage-free environments, then you find that naturally the cost of raising animals, the cost of meat goes up. Just go to your supermarket and look at the price of organic, humanely raised meat versus your average packaged meat, and you'll see that there's probably a 3 to 4x difference in cost. And that's because an animal is a real living thing, and if you really want to take care of it, that takes effort and it takes money. And one of the reasons why meat consumption has gone up is people can afford it. Even the poor people can afford it now because the cost of meat has gone down, right? So we agree with the vegans on these two things. But with this background and with these agreed points, with these points of agreement, how do you respond to the vegan argument? And here's my approach. As Muslims, our laws, all of the Sharia, basically promote life, right? Life is the center of the Sharia. Promoting life is one of the key goals of the Sharia, in addition to promoting justice. Allah says in the Quran, saving a life is like saving the entire mankind, right? We also accept that death is an inevitable consequence, right? We recognize that life is a gift. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Muhyi, but He's also al-Mumit. And most importantly, we recognize that it is better to live, it is better to be born, it is better to grow, to enjoy provisions, to enjoy family life, to enjoy comfort, and then die, than not, be born at all. So if you look at the population of cattle today in the world, it's about 1 billion, right? And the overwhelming majority of the cattle population in the world is used for food products, for meat, right? Now, if you think about the average lifespan of a cow, it's about 20 years. The average lifespan of a goat is about, 15 years, right? Plus or minus. The average lifespan of sheep is about 10 years. Now, imagine a world in which you didn't have crazy industrial farming and where animals are actually treated well in these farms. What we're talking about is that when you raise an animal and you feed it well and you give it provisions, you allow it a clean and an expansive environment in which it can fulfill itself, in which it can reproduce, perpetuate the species, enjoy provisions, you're giving 10, 15, 20 years of pleasure, right? We agree with vegans that at the point of death, at the point of slaughter, the pain experienced by the animal is pretty severe. But the reality is that the animal is going to die anyways. No animal is immortal. And death is painful, even if the animal falls sick. And in some cases, if an animal falls sick, the suffering that it endures can be longer and can be more painful. So, whilst it is clear that slaughtering causes suffering, the reality is that if you raise an animal properly, you provide it many, many, many years of pleasure and enjoyment, and most importantly, from an Islamic perspective, it allows us to fulfill our job on earth, which is to take care of the earth, so that the earth can become a place for the glorification of the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If all of the world were to become vegan, what would happen? Well, the population of cattle would drop dramatically because there's no need for all these species to exist. The population of cattle would drop from 1 billion to, I don't know, let's say 50 million. So hundreds of millions of animals would become worthless. And by focusing on those few seconds of pain at the point of death, the vegans are missing the entire plot, that the cattle have the opportunity to enjoy life, to grow, to reproduce, to enjoy provisions, to live and fulfill their purpose on earth. So the overall response that I would make is, if the vegans are really interested in maximizing pleasure for animals, maximizing goodness, what they would really promote is humane farming, right? They should fight for humane farming practices, and Muslims should join vegans in promoting humane farming practices, because our laws, our Sharia laws, are very aligned with humane farming practices. The other point I'd make is that veganism in general, even though it is couched in the form of a concern for suffering, I think it's an ideology at its core. It's focused solely on the pain at the point of death, right? It ignores the beauty of life. The vegan wouldn't care if cattle disappeared tomorrow, right? Because, like I said, if meat consumption decreases or ends tomorrow, the population of cattle would drop dramatically. The vegan wouldn't care. They'll say, hey, we don't care, because they don't really think that the life of the animal is valuable. They're so focused on the few seconds of pain that the animal experiences at the point of death that they forget that the animal has been able to live 10, 15, 20 years and enjoy and fulfill its potential as a living being. And so I think that, if you really probe, you'll find that vegans, if they truly valued cattle, if they truly value the life of cattle as they claim they do, they would promote a solution that both maximizes the lifespan of the animal, the number of cattle, the quantity of cattle, as well as the opportunity to reduce suffering while they live. The reality is that death is always painful, Death is inevitable, whether you die a natural death, whether you get sick and die, whether you die in an accident, or whether somebody slaughters you. The reality is the pain of death is natural. Think about the pain of birth, right? There's no birth without pain. You cannot, take that pain away. So the reality is that, vegans, if they have the right intentions, Muslims should partner with them, right? We should partner with vegans in fighting industrial farming practices, in inhumane farming practices. But we have to remind the vegans that our point of view is very different. We look at cattle not just as packaged boxes of meat, right? We don't think of them as just things that suffer pain at the point of death. They have potential. They have a job, a role to play on earth. And by being stewards of cattle and by raising them humanely, Muslims are performing a righteous act, and most importantly, our role as Khalifa on earth. وآخر الدعوة عن الحمد لله رب العالمين. I hope you enjoyed this video. Inshallah, please leave your comments and criticisms. I hope to come back to you more later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.